Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into the glittering, sometimes bewildering world of ultra-luxury real estate, right here in New York City. You know the kind of place, soaring skyscrapers piercing the clouds, famous architects, promises of just absolute perfection, incredible amenities, and, well, price tags that honestly could make your eyes water. We're talking tens, sometimes even hundreds of millions of dollars for one apartment. But what happens when that gleaming facade, that whole promise of flawless luxury, starts to, well, crack? Not just cosmetically, but like at its very foundations. Okay, let's really unpack this. Our focus today is a really high-stakes legal battle. It's centered on one of New York City's most iconic and, one of its most expensive skyscrapers, 432 Park Avenue. And this isn't just about, a leaky faucet in a penthouse. No, this is a truly massive legal complaint filed by condominium boards that are representing the actual unit owners against the developer and also the former board members, the ones appointed by the developer initially. So our mission in this deep dive is really to dissect these allegations. We want to truly understand what went wrong, or at least what the plaintiffs say went wrong, in a building where owners paid just an astonishing amount of money for what they believed would be the absolute pinnacle of luxury living. Throughout this deep dive, you're going to hear about the lawsuit's main claims, allegations of really widespread and severe construction and design defects. And these are in the building's common elements, things everyone shares. We'll hear about the developer's alleged refusal to fix them, and these serious claims of breaches of fiduciary duty by that original developer-appointed board. We'll get into the specifics, the horrible noise and vibrations, the elevators always breaking down, the serious floods, even, believe it or not, dangerous electrical explosions. It all leads to these staggering financial damages they're asking for, over $100 million. This is really a story about the huge gap that can open up between that marketed dream and the engineered reality. It's about trust, broken promises, and the very, very high cost of allegedly cutting corners at the absolute highest level of real estate.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here, beyond just the details of this one building, is how this complaint isn't just about, bricks and mortar. It's really about the fundamental promises that come with ultra-luxury development. And it's about the incredible amount of trust that people place in those who conceive, build, and crucially, initially manage these incredibly complex and expensive structures. For you, the listener, this deep dive really offers a shortcut to getting informed. Instead of having to wade through a frankly pretty dense legal documents yourself, you'll get the core facts, the specific allegations, and the deeper implications, all sort of distilled for clarity. But it's really crucial to remember this. Our discussion today is based only on the allegations made by the condominium boards in this specific legal complaint. We are looking squarely at the plaintiff's perspective as they've laid it out in their court filing. We're not taking sides. We're not bringing in outside defenses or anything like that. This approach lets us get a really clear, focused understanding of exactly what claims are being made and what it all means according to the people living there.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit more. When 432 Park Avenue was first dreamed up and put on the market, it was presented as, nothing short of extraordinary. The offering plan, all the marketing stuff, they touted it as one of the finest condominiums in the city, an ultra-luxurious residence in a world-class premium building. Picture this, a soaring Park Avenue tower just south of Central Park, designed by the acclaimed architect Raphael Vignoli. It tops out at an astounding 1,396 feet. For a while there, it actually was the tallest residential building in the entire Western Hemisphere, a true landmark on what everyone knows as Billionaire's Row. Right, and we're talking about apartments that commanded just extraordinarily high prices, which, matched the sponsor's sales pitch. They were touting the absolute finest quality design, construction, amenities, safety, security, the whole package. Unit owners, in many cases, paid tens of millions of dollars. Some deals reportedly even went into the hundreds of millions. And they were buying these homes expecting nothing less than perfection, right? A flawless example of luxury. The implied promise was this sanctuary of just unparalleled comfort and totally pristine engineering. But, and this is a big but, here's where it gets really interesting, and where the core accusation of this lawsuit just comes into sharp, frankly disturbing focus. The complaint alleges that this supposedly world-class building was delivered, quote, riddled with over 1,500 identified construction and design defects to the common elements. And just to be absolutely clear for our deep dive today, this lawsuit focuses only on those common elements. We're talking about the shared spaces and systems, the structure itself, the mechanical systems, the amenities, the roof, the facade, elevators, hallways, things like that. It's not about problems inside individual private apartments, although those might exist too. The complaint basically says that far from the ultra-luxury spaces they were promised, the unit owners were sold a building plagued by breakdowns and failures. And these have, as the complaint puts it, endangered and inconvenienced residents, guests, and workers. These alleged problems have become so pronounced, apparently, that they've even been, quote, repeatedly the subject of highly critical accounts in the press and social media, which you can imagine effectively shatters that initial perfect image they worked so hard to create.
Yeah, and when we look at the nature of the action section right at the start of the legal complaint, it's immediately clear this isn't just some squabble over minor cosmetic stuff or, the kind of wear and tear you might expect over time. The document explicitly alleges extremely significant and much publicized construction defects. And this really raises a critical question, doesn't it? What happens, both legally and practically, when the promise of ultra-luxury, the absolute highest tier of real estate, just doesn't meet the basic reality of sound construction and design? It's not just about losing comfort, although that's obviously a huge factor when you're paying prices like these. More critically, it potentially impacts the residents' safety, their simple ability to enjoy their homes, and undoubtedly the financial value of these massive investments. The complaint really underscores that these alleged defects weren't just isolated incidents. They were systemic, affecting the overall integrity and functionality of what was marketed as a truly world-class property. It paints a picture of fundamental flaws.
So, what exactly was wrong with this shining monument to luxury, according to the lawsuit? Let's peel back those layers and really get into the nitty-gritty of the alleged failures, because some of these details are truly astonishing, especially when you think about the building's reputation and price point. The complaint lays out this whole litany of specific defects, and it paints a pretty vivid picture of the challenges residents were apparently facing. Okay, first up, intolerable noise and vibrations. The complaint states that because the sponsor allegedly failed to properly design and build the building to handle its incredible height in, the forces of nature like wind, units experience horrible and obtrusive noise and vibrations. And we're not talking about a slight hum or that gentle sway you might expect in a very tall building. No, according to the complaint, we're talking about sounds so severe they make it hard to sleep. In fact, there's a quote in the complaint attributed to Richard Ressler. He's the chairman of CIM, that's the big real estate company behind the sponsor, and he actually owns a unit in 432 Park himself. He allegedly admitted in, let's say, an unguarded moment, that these sound and vibration issues were intolerable. He apparently said it made it difficult to sleep, even during moderately inclement weather. The complaint even claims that during a meeting in October 2020, Mr. Ressler specifically said he wanted these noise issues fixed before he moved into the building permanently. Yet, according to the lawsuit, the problems persist. The alleged severity is pretty shocking. Some residents have apparently been completely displaced from their multi-million-dollar homes for periods in excess of 19 months. Imagine that. Nearly 2 years you can't live in your apartment because of noise. And the specific noises described in the complaint are pretty vivid. Creaking, banging, and clicking noises reported throughout the building. And apparently the building's trash chute, when someone uses it, sounds like a bomb. Just jarring and alarming. So what was the sponsor's response to all this, according to the plaintiffs? Well, they allege half-hearted attempts, sort of unit-by-unit fixes that were largely unsuccessful. And crucially, the complaint contends the sponsor kept selling units without telling buyers about these potential widespread noise issues, even as they allegedly knew how bad the problem was becoming.
Right. From an engineering and design perspective, these allegations about intolerable noise and vibrations linked to the building's height and sway, well, they're particularly damning if true. It suggests a really fundamental miscalculation or maybe an oversight in the initial design or the construction phase for a building this tall, a super tall structure. It's not just about everyday apartment noises we all deal with, it's about the very structure itself, allegedly creating an environment where basic comfort and just livability are profoundly compromised. And the fact that the chairman of the company behind the sponsor, who is also a unit owner, allegedly described the noise as intolerable, I mean, that gives you a pretty chilling sense of the scale of the problem, at least from the plaintiff's perspective. And the allegation that the fixes were just half-hearted or unit by unit, that suggests a real lack of a comprehensive building-wide solution to what's described as a systemic structural and design flaw affecting everyone, those common elements again. This isn't about one apartment having a problem, it's allegedly about the building's fundamental integrity.
Okay, so beyond the noise, next we have recurring elevator malfunctions. This sounds like a nightmare in a building this tall. The complaint details that the elevators in 432 Park have, quote, repeatedly shut down entirely, apparently trapping residents and their family members inside for hours. It alleges multiple occasions where people were just left stranded in elevators that weren't working, cutting off essential access to their homes. Now, apparently the elevators were programmed to slow down in high winds, which, okay, maybe that makes sense for safety in a super tall building. But these malfunctions were allegedly made much worse by severe water leaks inside the elevator shafts themselves, leading to ongoing breakdowns. And the complaint stresses these problems affected all areas of the building, including the retail area, garage, and commercial space. So it points to this pervasive, critical issue with one of the most fundamental systems in the building. Again, despite all those luxury promises.
Oh, absolutely. The reliability of elevators, what we call vertical transportation, it's just paramount in a super tall skyscraper like 432 Park Avenue. They
Mhm.
aren't just conveniences, they are literally the arteries of a building that high. So when they are allegedly failing repeatedly, trapping residents, and being affected not just by outside factors like wind, but more alarmingly, internal factors like water leaks, well, that profoundly impacts not just convenience, but also safety, emergency access, and the whole functionality of the building. And the complaint's emphasis that these issues hit all areas, not just residential, that really speaks to the widespread nature of the alleged problem. It suggests a systemic failure in a core building function that affects pretty much everyone who walks in the door.
Right. And speaking of water leaks, that brings us to the next major point: severe flooding and water damage. The building, according to this complaint, has allegedly experienced multiple incidents of severe flooding and widespread water damage throughout its common elements. The filing highlights two really big leaks back in November 2018. One started on the 60th floor, another on the 74th. These were apparently so significant that water actually got into the elevator shafts, which then stopped two of the four residential elevators from working for weeks. Weeks. In total, these two incidents allegedly affected 35 units, as well as common areas. And an investigation, according to the complaint, pointed to the alleged cause being poor plumbing installation, including loose bolts buried under insulation. That suggests pretty fundamental flaws in how it was built. And it wasn't just those big floods. Apparently, the building has also faced persistent water infiltration problems down in the sub-basement levels. And here, the sponsor allegedly just applied Band-Aid type fixes, which the complaint asserts actually made the issues worse because they were totally inadequate. There's also a direct financial hit mentioned. These leaks allegedly led to significant increases in the building's insurance premiums. And guess who pays for that now? The unit owners. It basically transforms what should have been the developer's responsibility into an ongoing financial headache for the residents.
Yeah, water damage is incredibly destructive in any building, obviously. But in a luxury high-rise, it's particularly problematic. You've got intricate systems, very high-value finishes, a dense population. It just causes havoc. The complaint's allegations of poor plumbing installation and, loose bolts buried under insulation, if true, that suggests these weren't just random accidents or things you couldn't foresee. It points towards built-in vulnerabilities that stem directly from the construction phase itself, and this idea of band-aid fixes instead of real, comprehensive, lasting solutions. That's a recurring theme in the complaint, and it's deeply concerning. Because, as alleged, it just leads to escalating problems down the road, compounded damage, and increased costs, like we see with those spiraling insurance premiums. It really points to an alleged strategy of just deferring responsibility and pushing the financial burden onto the residents.
And then we get to something truly alarming: dangerous electrical explosions. This sounds terrifying. The complaint details this really harrowing incident quite recently, on June 3rd, 2021. A worker was apparently attempting yet another Band-Aid fix for those persistent water leaks down in the sub-basement. He was drilling through concrete. According to the complaint, this worker accidentally cut into live electrical wiring, causing an arc flash explosion. Now, this wasn't just a little spark. The force of the blast was allegedly so immense that the worker was thrown several feet through the air. The immediate results were severe. Power went out instantly to some residential units, and the air conditioning shut down completely for a large part of the building. The damage allegedly required immediate emergency repairs and cost, get this, in excess of $1.5 million to fix. Now, the sponsor's alleged role here is critical. The complaint states they failed to provide as-built drawings, those crucial blueprints that show how the building was actually put together, not just how it was planned or even mark where the electrical wiring is located. This was something the board's own consultant had specifically recommended as a basic safety measure. And on top of that, the sponsor allegedly refused to accept responsibility for the explosion and refused to pay for those urgent, multi-million-dollar repairs. They basically left the dangerous condition for the board to deal with, forcing the unit owners to foot the bill and handle the risk. And incredibly, the complaint states this was the second arc flash explosion to occur at the building in the past 3 years under the sponsor's watch. The second one. That points to a deeply disturbing, repeated pattern of alleged negligence that directly impacts life safety.
Wow. Yeah, the allegation of repeated arc flash explosions is, that's a paramount safety concern, not just for workers, but for absolutely everyone in that building. An arc flash is an extremely serious electrical event. It can cause horrific injuries, even death, and massive damage to the electrical infrastructure. The complaints claim that the sponsor failed to provide those as-built drawings or didn't follow recommendations to mark wiring locations. If true, that suggests a profound and incredibly dangerous lapse in just essential safety protocols and documentation management. Those drawings are fundamental for doing any kind of maintenance or repair work safely. If they were withheld or inaccurate or just not properly maintained, it creates huge avoidable risks for any future work. And then the alleged refusal to immediately address the resulting damage and to pay for it. That just compounds the safety implications and the financial burden on the unit owners. It completely undermines that implied promise of a secure, expertly managed, safe environment.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking stuff. And beyond these huge, sort of catastrophic incidents, the complaint also briefly lists a whole host of other widespread defects. It really paints a picture of just pervasive issues throughout the building's common areas. Things like highly visible cracks in the drywall of many ceilings, highly visible cracks above doorways and where walls meet ceilings. There are also alleged air and water leaks at windows, which obviously hits comfort and energy efficiency, baseboard pulling and misaligned joints, malfunctioning sliding doors, grout joint openings and cracking in tile work, excessive fog and window condensation, gaps and misalignment around light fixtures, and even repeated circuit breaker tripping. I mean, it's a long list. It really indicates that the alleged problems weren't just isolated or minor things, but pretty endemic to the construction, according to plaintiffs. And then kind of the final insult, maybe. For a building marketed on its sleek modernity and cutting-edge design, the complaint notes that 432 Park Avenue received an absolutely abysmal energy efficiency rating. It got a D from the City of New York. That's the lowest possible score for buildings that actually submit the required data. And the complaint explicitly blames this shockingly poor rating, based on their information and belief, on poor design, many construction defects, and the mismanagement by the sponsor control board. It asserts that this D rating for a brand new, supposedly ultra-high-quality modern marble has adversely affected the value of the building and the value of the units in the building. It's just a really stark indicator that the building's alleged operational integrity doesn't come close to matching its aspirational image.
Right. And if you try to connect all these different alleged defects, look at the bigger picture, it becomes pretty clear these aren't being presented as isolated incidents or just minor inconveniences. The complaint really paints a picture of systemic issues. It suggests that the actual design and construction of a building of this incredible height and luxury somehow fundamentally failed in key areas, from sound mitigation to essential utility systems, right through to basic structural integrity. The consistent theme, from the plaintiff's perspective anyway, is that the building as it was delivered just did not conform to the very standards and promises it was marketed under, which then raises that critical question: what exactly were the obligations of the sponsor, the developer, in this whole situation? The complaint is very clear on this point. It states flat out that correcting these defects was the sponsor's obligation under the condominium's offering plan. Remember, that's the legally binding document incorporated into every single unit owner's purchase agreement. And furthermore, the sponsor and its principal, Charles Garner, explicitly certified in that offering plan that it did not knowingly contain any false statement of fact or omit any material fact, and that all the statements and representations made in it were true and complete. That places a really significant legal burden on the sponsor to deliver exactly what was promised and certified, and these allegations suggest a pretty stark deviation from that.
So what does this all actually mean when a luxury building, where people paid, tens of millions, is allegedly riddled with these kinds of systemic problems? It leads us straight into the real core of the lawsuit, the accusation of sponsor malfeasance and breach of fiduciary duty. The plaintiffs are basically contending that the sponsor didn't just build a deeply flawed structure, but then they allegedly refused to fix it properly. And on top of that, that the individuals who were on the initial sponsor-appointed board breached their fundamental duties to the very unit owners they were supposed to be representing. Let's start with the sponsor's alleged refusal to remedy. The complaint describes the sponsor's response to all these pervasive defects as, quote, atrocious. It includes frequent denials of responsibility for issues the plaintiffs believe they were clearly obligated to address under the plan. It further claims that any remediation efforts the sponsor did undertake, when they happened at all, were negligently performed. And at worst, this allegedly caused millions of additional dollars in costs and outages of critical building systems. And at best, they largely failed to address identified defects. So ineffective fixes that sometimes made things worse. Meetings between the board's professional teams and the sponsor's representatives have been, as the complaint alleges, pretty much fruitless, used more for posturing and legal positioning than actually solving the problems. The complaint specifically claims the sponsor has consistently acted in bad faith, trying to use these meetings to improve its litigation position, rather than actually addressing the defects identified in the engineering report. That's a pretty significant claim, right? It suggests intentional obstruction, a calculated move to avoid accountability. Yeah, and adding to this pattern of alleged evasion, the complaint states that the sponsor recently claimed to have repaired hundreds of these defects. But then an independent engineering consultant review, done by that firm SBI Consultants, found that actually only 9 of these hundreds had really been fixed. Furthermore, that SBI report apparently stated that many of the purportedly repaired defects were untouched and just remained in their original defective condition. So the complaint frames this whole thing not as some oversight or a simple inefficiency, but as a calculated, deliberate strategy by the sponsor. This alleged strategy involved a mix of things: delaying tactics, deceptive practices, the withholding of vital information, and using cheap, shoddy materials and methods to perform perfunctory, temporary fixes for chronic, serious problems. And the explicit purpose of these alleged offensive actions. According to the complaint, it was to shirk its responsibilities and, crucially, to shift sponsor costs and expenses onto the residential owners, essentially pushing their liabilities onto the people who bought the apartments. The financial implications of this alleged strategy are pretty profound and, frankly, unsettling. The complaint alleges that the sponsor has systematically siphoned off the unit owner's purchase payments, basically distributing massive amounts of funds to cheat and investors as profits before actually remediating its defective construction of the building. So the deep concern here, as alleged, is that the sponsor then depleted the building's working capital to pay for the few repairs it has addressed, quote, potentially leaving the sponsor entity itself grossly undercapitalized, meaning they might not have enough money left to actually satisfy their obligations even if the plaintiffs win the lawsuit. It's essentially a claim that profits were taken out way before the fundamental structural and operational integrity was ensured, potentially leaving a massive repair bill unfunded. And even after the unit owners finally gained control of the board, the sponsor allegedly kept interfering. They apparently made a concerted effort to undermine the new board's actions. The complaint claims that back on April 15, 2021, the sponsor sent a letter by email directly to all the residential unit owners, and this email was explicitly designed, the complaint says, to undermine the board's effort to take action, to hold the sponsor accountable. This email allegedly made numerous false claims about how the new board was handling the issues. And furthermore, the sponsor allegedly tried to prevent the board from implementing a special assessment. That's an extra charge to unit owners, above their regular common charges, specifically intended to raise funds to hire the professionals needed to address the sponsor's alleged failures. This is a really crucial aspect because it suggests active interference, even after the formal transition of power. A clear attempt, allegedly, to control the narrative and definitely control who pays for fixing everything.
Yeah, this really highlights a critical vulnerability that often exists in new condominium ownership situations, that inherent conflict of interest right at the beginning. The complaint details how the sponsor had control of the residential board for years. They had the power to designate a majority of its members. This initial control period, as it's called, lasted from the moment the condominium was created right up until November 19th, 2020. And during that whole time, the residential board wasn't even permitted to make decisions on behalf of the condominium without getting prior written consent from the sponsor, except in very limited circumstances. Full unit owner control of the board. That was only achieved on January 27th, 2021. That timeline is incredibly significant because it's precisely during this period of sponsor control that many of the alleged issues were first discovered and, according to the complaint, not adequately investigated or addressed by the board that was supposed to represent the owners. Unit owners often find themselves legally obligated to inherit a board that was initially designed primarily to protect the developer's interests, not necessarily their own. And this brings us directly to the second major area of contention in this whole section: the alleged breach of fiduciary duty by individual defendants. The complaint specifically names Charles Garner, Ryan Harder, Devin McCorkle, Jeff Mack, Harold Macklow, Jerry Thomas, and Terry Wachsner as defendants. These were all individuals appointed by the sponsor to serve on the formerly sponsor-controlled condominium, residential, and commercial boards. The core accusation against them is that they allegedly ran interference for the sponsor, ignoring their obligations to the residents. Now, as board members, they owed a very strict legal and ethical duty, a fiduciary duty to act solely for the benefit of the unit owners and the condominium itself. Their priority should have been the owner's well-being and financial health above all else. However, the complaint alleges they basically thumbed their noses at their fiduciary obligations to hold sponsor accountable. And instead, they allegedly placed their own pecuniary interest and the pecuniary interest of sponsor above the interest of the unit owners, protecting the developer over the buyers, essentially. The specific omissions alleged against these individual defendants, as laid out in the complaint, are quite damning if proven true. They include things like failing to properly investigate all these defects, unilaterally terminating discussions about the building's construction and operation issues, and even refusing requests for historic engineering reports and basic unit owner contact information, which is essential data you need for transparency and just effective governance. Furthermore, the complaint alleges that these individual defendants actually delayed the election handover, specifically to further protect the sponsor's interests. This allegedly happened right on the eve of a scheduled election in September 2020. They apparently unilaterally canceled that election and then proposed amendments to the bylaws that would have diluted the unit owner's voting power and also reduced the length of board member terms. These alleged actions, certainly from the plaintiff's perspective, represent a direct, conscious violation of their fiduciary duties. An attempt, they claim, to maintain control specifically at the expense of the unit owners they were legally obligated to serve.
Wow. Okay, so to really understand the sheer scale of these alleged issues, the unit owners didn't just, complain amongst themselves. They took pretty decisive action. They commissioned independent, professional engineering reports. And the results, frankly, as laid out in the complaint, were shocking. They form a really crucial pillar of the evidence being presented in this lawsuit. So this is where we get into the SBI reports and this concept of value engineering. Let's talk first about the SBI reports. A committee of concerned residents went out and retained SBI Consultants, Inc. The complaint describes them as a well-respected firm with extensive experience on big projects like 432 Park. Their job was specific: conduct a thorough, independent assessment, catalog all the defects in the common elements, and recommend how to fix them. SBI apparently performed a really comprehensive visual review and assessment. They looked at the building's mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection systems, the exterior or envelope, the interior common areas, and the elevator systems. They also provided observations about noise mitigation and energy efficiency. And it's really critical to know this. The complaint highlights that the SBI report explicitly excluded all defects and non-conforming items relating to normal wear and tear. So these weren't just minor expected issues that come with age. No, these were allegedly serious, actionable construction and design flaws present from the start. So after this meticulous analysis, what did SBI find? They identified a staggering total of 1,237 observed defects just in the common areas of the building, and many of these were specifically described as life safety issues. That classification alone is deeply concerning. Let me just break down some of the most illustrative findings from the residential report, just to give you a sense of how pervasive these alleged problems were. For the structural envelope system, that's the building's skeleton and skin, basically SBI identified 305 observed defects. Out of those, a startling 81% were alleged code violations, meaning they didn't even meet the legally mandated safety and construction standards. Furthermore, 51% were alleged to not conform to the original construction drawings, so a significant deviation from the approved plans. Examples of these alleged structural failures include things like severely damaged stainless steel on the outrigger beams on the drum floors. Those are those open mechanical floors designed to let wind pass through, issues with the roofing membrane, causing leaks, ongoing below-grade leaks in the foundations. Also, defective fasteners on exterior cladding, leaving potential points of water infiltration, which could compromise the building's outer shell, and concrete spalling. That's when the concrete surface starts to flake off or deteriorate. There were also allegations of just missing stuff. Missing flashing, waterproofing, and fasteners, and improper waterproofing connections, all absolutely critical for protecting the building from rain, wind, and snow.
Right. And when you see such a high percentage of alleged code violations in the structural and envelope system, 81% is an enormous figure. It really goes far beyond just defects. It speaks to a fundamental non-compliance with basic building regulations, regulations that are there specifically for safety, structural integrity, and making sure the building lasts. The envelope, in particular, That's the building's primary defense against the elements. If that's compromised right from day one, as alleged here, it just creates this cascade of problems downstream, including those severe water infiltration issues we talked about earlier. It suggests, certainly from the plaintiff's viewpoint, a systemic failure to meet even the basic construction standards, let alone the kind of ultra-luxury promises that were made.
Okay, then moving on to the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, MEP systems, the building's guts, essentially. SBI identified an even larger number of alleged problems here. 769 observed defects. A significant 79% of these were allegedly not conforming to the construction drawings. 77% were allegedly not up to industry standard practices. And a truly concerning 31%, nearly one-third, were classified as life safety issues. Think about that. Nearly a third of the problems in the core systems potentially impacting resident safety. The report detailed issues like missing piping supports in almost all mechanical equipment rooms and missing cyclone separators for pumps, which are devices supposed to protect pump seals from failing prematurely. Critically, things like fire pumps, temper valves, gas valves, strainers, and domestic water tanks were all found to have been either blocked or inaccessible. That's a potentially catastrophic issue in an emergency situation if you can't get to the shutoffs so the pumps don't work. Other alleged issues included improper fire barriers, missing insulations, and various sprinkler head issues.
Yeah, the alleged defects in the MEP systems are particularly troubling because these systems are the literal lifeblood of a modern skyscraper. They're essential for daily operations, comfort, and emergency response. When fire pumps are allegedly blocked or critical valves are inaccessible, it can have catastrophic implications, not just for emergencies, but for everyday comfort too. The claim that nearly 80% of these alleged defects didn't conform to drawings or industry standards, that suggests a consistent, pervasive failure to adhere to the very blueprints that were supposed to guide the construction process. This is really where those promises of a world-class building seem to starkly diverge from the alleged reality described in the complaint. It potentially exposes residents to ongoing inconvenience, definitely higher operating costs, and, most importantly, significant safety risks.
Then, for the architectural interiors in the common areas, SBI identified 104 observed defects. And here, a staggering 75% were classified as life safety issues. The inspection allegedly revealed things like joints between dissimilar materials in need of correcting to allow for expansion and contraction related to normal movement within the building. If that's not done right, it can lead to visual cracks and water infiltration. Furthermore, SBI apparently identified that interior anchoring systems are required to be installed within the walls of units to allow for proper movement to mitigate noises generated by dissimilar materials. They also found failed waterproofing in several locations at mechanical rooms, which again leads right back to those pervasive water damage issues we keep hearing about. And finally, the elevator vertical systems had 19 observed defects identified, with 68% allegedly not conforming to industry standard. This directly contributes, the plaintiffs argue, to those repeated, frustrating, and potentially dangerous elevator malfunctions residents have faced. Now, it wasn't just the residential side. The commercial unit owners also commissioned their own SBI report. And that report identified numerous construction defects specific to the commercial sections of the building. For just a portion of these commercial defects, SBI estimated the repair costs would be approximately $5 million. And the complaint stresses that the vast bulk of these commercial defects have also not been addressed to date. So you have these incredibly detailed, damning reports from a respected engineering firm. What was the sponsor's alleged response to all this? Well, the complaint details that after receiving the preliminary SBI report back in July 2020, the sponsor allegedly just claimed that it was not responsible for approximately half of the issues identified, just dismissed half of them. Worse yet, even for the issues where they supposedly conceded responsibility, they allegedly refused to provide information about such remedial work and permit SBI to approve and oversee the scope of remedial action. So, no transparency, no oversight. And despite claiming they had performed various fixes, the sponsor allegedly refused repeatedly to provide any documentation or proof of its remediation. And then when SBI went back to actually check the work, they found that many of the purportedly repaired defects were untouched, still broken. The complaint states it pretty bluntly. The sponsor ignored most of the items listed in the SBI report and, quote, does not intend to remedy many of the construction defects listed therein.
This alleged behavior, it really illustrates a critical point about accountability in these situations. Those documents provided by the sponsor, the offering plan, the construction drawings, they become foundational. They're the benchmark. And the allegations here suggest a systematic, maybe even active, deviation from what was promised in those documents and what would meet basic industry standards or even safety codes. The consistent pattern, at least from the plaintiff's perspective, is one where the sponsor allegedly denies responsibility, performs ineffective or non-existent fixes, and then crucially withholds the information that would allow for proper assessment and verification of any remediation work. I mean, think about the level of due diligence you, the listener, would expect if you were investing, say, $50 million dollars in an apartment. This whole situation raises profound concerns about transparency and accountability in high-stakes real estate development, particularly when such extensive independent findings from engineers are allegedly just dismissed or ignored, leaving the unit owners to bear the burden and the cost.
Yeah, exactly. Now, let's dig into a really fascinating and frankly concerning aspect alleged in the complaint. It ties directly into the financial impact on the unit owners. It's this concept of value engineering and its cost to owners. The board allegedly discovered that the sponsor engaged in actions that were designed specifically to achieve short-term construction savings for themselves. But paradoxically and perhaps strategically, these actions created massive ongoing expenses for the unit owners down the line. This is really crucial insight from the complaint. Alleged short-term developer savings morphed directly into long-term financial burdens for the residents. An egregious example highlighted in the complaint concerns the elevators, which we already know have had persistent problems. The sponsor allegedly negotiated a lower-cost upfront contract with Schindler Elevator Corporation for the design and installation of these troubled elevators. Okay, lower upfront cost sounds good, right? But this lower upfront cost came, allegedly, in exchange for a long-term maintenance contract at higher than industry standard rates. So, in essence, the complaint suggests this maneuver effectively transferred the real cost of construction onto the unit owners through inflated maintenance fees over many, many years. And what's more, the sponsor allegedly allowed Schindler to install proprietary equipment and software in these elevators. And what that does, according to the complaint, is render it exorbitantly expensive to replace Schindler for the building's ongoing elevator maintenance needs. It essentially locked the building into a very costly long-term arrangement with just one provider, making it extremely difficult and expensive to ever seek competitive bids for maintenance or upgrades later on. Another really stark example comes from those drum floors. Remember, the open mechanical floors high up the tower? The complaint alleges that the sponsor installed cheap, inadequate, under-engineered railings on these floors, which are hundreds of feet up in the air. And these railings have been and are expected to continue failing far before their warranted period. So what's the consequence? The unit owners are now saddled with frequent repair costs for something that should have been a durable, high-quality installation in the first place. Again, the allegation is that initial construction costs were shifted onto the owners through ongoing maintenance expenses. And here's a truly astonishing detail from the complaint. It's one that just makes it really hard to reconcile ultra-luxury with the alleged reality. The latest recommendation from the sponsor's own engineering consultant to address these failing railings, it was to use duct tape, specifically Gorilla brand duct tape, to literally tie failing sections of railings together on these hundreds of feet high drum floors. I mean, the image of a multi-million-dollar skyscraper relying on duct tape for structural integrity on its facade. It's just a stark symbol of the alleged gap between aspiration and execution. The complaint also alleges the sponsor skimped on just common sense improvements, things that would have cost very little to install initially, but now their absence will cost the building significantly in ongoing expenses and operational headaches. For instance, they allegedly failed to include variable frequency drives, or VFDs, on the chillers and other rotating equipment. VFDs are basically smart controllers. They optimize motor speed for efficiency, so things don't just run full blast all the time. Their absence, as alleged, causes equipment to either run at full speed constantly, wasting energy, or just trip offline, leading to frequent outages. They also allegedly failed to locate critical valves in easily accessible locations, or failed to install the necessary access platforms and ladders for maintenance workers. This creates, as the complaint says, more costly and more dangerous conditions for workers servicing equipment, and obviously drives up maintenance labor costs significantly. Furthermore, the complaint states that the sponsor took the cheapest route with the building's electrical feed. They only included one main feed into the entire building, which means whenever any work needs to be done related to that single feed, the whole building potentially faces electrical outages. And this original electrical feed was allegedly woefully inadequate to begin with. It has apparently required costly upgrades, as new commercial tenants moved in and their electrical needs exceeded the insufficient capacity provided in the sponsor's original designs. Again, a cost passed directly on to the owners, long after the sponsor was gone. So taken together, these examples of alleged value engineering reflect, as the complaint puts it, conscious decisions by the sponsor to build its purportedly top-end, ultra-luxury building as cheaply and as possible without regard to efficiency. All with the alleged intent to foist the resulting increased costs of maintenance and repairs onto the unit owners, all in contravention of prevailing industry standards. It's a direct accusation that long-term efficiency and owner costs were sacrificed for the developer's immediate profit.
Yeah, this whole section on alleged value engineering really paints a very clear picture of the strategy the plaintiffs are claiming existed. It illustrates that the promises made in the offering plan, the initial design specifications, the certified quality, all of that allegedly became secondary to achieving short-term cost savings for the developer. And this isn't just about the final product, what was delivered, it's about the process through which it was allegedly delivered, where upfront savings supposedly pocketed by the developer led directly to long-term financial burdens and significant operational headaches for the people who bought the units. For you, the listener, this case really highlights the critical importance of understanding not just the purchase price, but the contractual obligations and the potential for these hidden long-term costs in what might seem like a straightforward, high-value transaction. It's a really stark reminder that what's behind the walls, and indeed what's buried in the fine print of things like maintenance contracts, can be just as significant, maybe even more so, than the glamorous facade and the initial price tag everyone sees.
Okay, so with all these alleged issues, all these problems, and the sponsor's reported refusal to address them properly, what exactly are the plaintiffs seeking in this massive lawsuit? The financial stakes here are, as you can probably guess by now, absolutely astronomical. We're now diving into the financial damages and legal claims being sought by the condo boards. The lawsuit brings multiple counts, or specific legal claims against the defendants. Each one represents a different legal theory for why they should be held responsible. The first major category is breach of contract against the sponsor. This covers counts 1, 3, and V in the complaint. The core allegation here is that the sponsor allegedly failed to construct the building substantially in accordance with the provisions of this plan, all applicable legal requirements, and the descriptions of the property and specifications. That's the language from the offering plan and the purchase agreements they signed. The complaint also alleges that the sponsor permitted these defects to be concealed and intentionally failed to disclose them to people buying the unit before they closed the deal. For these alleged breaches of contract, the plaintiffs are seeking substantial monetary damages. Specifically for the common elements that affect both the residential and commercial sections, and also those affecting just the residential sections, the damages sought are believed to be in excess of $100 million. $100 million. And for the commercial sections alone, the damages sought are over $5 million.
Yeah, that phrase, substantially in accordance with the offering plan, is absolutely key to these breach of contract claims. That document, as we've discussed, it isn't just some marketing brochure, it's the foundational legally binding agreement that sets out all the expectations and the specifications for the entire building. So the plaintiffs are alleging that the building, as it was actually delivered, fundamentally and systematically deviated from those foundational promises and the certified specifications laid out in that plan. And the sheer magnitude of the damages being sought, believed to be well over $100 million just for common element repairs alone, it really underscores the severity of the alleged issues and the comprehensive nature of the remediation work they believe is required. It reflects not just the direct cost of fixing all the alleged defects, but also the potential devaluation of the property, the significant disruption caused to residents, and the alleged negligence involved in delivering a property that was sold as the absolute epitome of luxury and quality.
Right. Then the second major category of claims is breach of fiduciary duty against the individual defendants. This is outlined in counts 2, 4, and 6. These claims are brought against those individuals we named earlier: Charles Garner, Ryan Harder, Devin McCorkle, Jeff Mack, Harold MacLeod, Jerry Thomas, and Terry Waxner. All of them were sponsor-appointed members of the formerly sponsor-controlled condominium, residential, and commercial boards. The central allegation here is that these individuals, while serving as board members, allegedly, quote, ran the respective boards for the benefit of sponsor and their pecuniary interests, rather than acting in the absolute best interest of the condominium and its unit owners, which was their legal duty. They allegedly failed to properly investigate, disclose, and fix the widespread defects they knew about, effectively prioritizing the developer's profits over their legal obligations to the residents. For these alleged breaches of that fiduciary duty, the plaintiffs are seeking monetary damages against these individual defendants, jointly and severally. Now, jointly and severally is important legal language. It means that each individual defendant could potentially be held responsible for the entire amount of the damages awarded, not just their share. It gives the plaintiffs a more powerful mechanism for recovery if they win. And the amount sought here is also believed to be in excess of $100,000. Plus, they're asking for punitive damages on top of that. For the commercial sections alone, the damages sought against these individuals are over $5 million.
Exactly. And that concept of fiduciary duty is absolutely central here. When you agree to sit on a condominium board, whether you're appointed by the developer initially or later elected by the owners, you undertake a really profound legal and ethical obligation. Your duty is to act solely and exclusively for the benefit of the condominium and its unit owners. You have to prioritize their well-being and financial health above everything else, including the interests of the person or entity who appointed you. The complaint alleges that these individual defendants systematically subordinated that paramount duty to the financial gain of the sponsor, who was effectively their employer or affiliate. And the request for punitive damages, on top of the compensatory damages to cover repairs, that further highlights the alleged egregious nature of their actions. It indicates that the plaintiffs believed these weren't just simple mistakes or errors in judgment, but perhaps deliberate choices to shirk responsibility or a reckless disregard for their duties.
So when you add all these different claims together, the complaint's prayer for relief, that's the section at the end where they formally ask the court for what they want, states a total demand of not less than $125 million in damages. And that's against the sponsor and the individual defendants combined. I mean, that is a truly staggering figure for a lawsuit centered on alleged construction defects. It really represents the comprehensive nature of the alleged failures and the estimated costs of actually rectifying everything. In addition to these huge monetary damages, the plaintiffs are also seeking costs and attorney's fees incurred in connection with this dispute, which could also be substantial, as well as pre-judgment and post-judgment interest on all damages allowed by law. And they also include that standard catch-all phrase asking for such other and further relief as this court may deem just and appropriate. So yeah, this is very comprehensive legal action, meticulously detailed in the complaint, aiming to recover a vast sum of money to fix what are alleged to be fundamental failures in both the construction and the initial governance of 432 Park Avenue.
Absolutely. That magnitude of damages sought, believed to be over $125 million collectively, it certainly underscores the severity and the comprehensive nature of the alleged issues and the remediation they believe is required. It reflects not just the direct cost of repairs, but also, as we've said, the potential devaluation, the immense disruption to residents' lives, and the sheer scale of the alleged negligence involved. And the core of these claims, as we've really explored throughout this deep dive, rests heavily on the detailed evidence presented in those SBI reports, and that stark contrast they paint between the offering plan's clear promises and the alleged delivered condition of the building. For you, the listener, this case really serves as a critical education. It highlights the profound importance of understanding contractual obligations, scrutinizing those initial governance structures set up by developers, and recognizing what fiduciary responsibilities actually mean, especially in complex, high-value transactions involving real estate development. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that even in the most aspirational, high-profile projects, the fundamentals of construction quality and ethical governance remain absolutely paramount.
And that really brings us to the close of this deep dive into the 432 Park Avenue lawsuit. So just to recap, we've explored this alleged massive chasm between the ultra-luxury promises of 432 Park Avenue, which was billed as this world-class architectural marvel, and the extensive, incredibly costly defects that are meticulously detailed in this legal complaint. We've talked about everything from that intolerable noise and vibrations to severe flooding, recurring elevator malfunctions, those dangerous electrical explosions, and literally over 1,000 other defects identified by independent engineers. We've also delved into the very serious allegations of sponsor malfeasance, including what the plaintiffs call a calculated, deliberate strategy to avoid responsibility, shift costs onto owners, and potentially deplete funds needed for repairs. And we look at the alleged breaches of fiduciary duty by those sponsor-appointed board members who, it is claimed, protected the sponsor's interests above all else, rather than serving the residents they were legally obligated to represent. So what does this all mean for the future of luxury development? I mean, this lawsuit isn't just about one building, is it? It feels like it carries profound, broader implications for the entire real estate industry, especially in that ultra-luxury market segment. It raises some really searching questions about oversight, about accountability, about the true meaning of value engineering, and about the trust that people place in developers and their initial governance structures when they're buying into what is essentially a dream. This deep dive into 432 Park Avenue really makes you wonder, beyond the glamorous facade. How much trust do we or should we place in the details, in the contracts, and in the people behind these massive aspirational projects? What are the true costs, both hidden and exposed, when those foundations start to crack?
It's a great question. Knowledge, after all, is most valuable when it's understood and maybe applied. This deep dive into the 432 part complaint really serves as a powerful reminder, I think, of how critical due diligence, transparent communication, and robust oversight really are, even, maybe especially, when dealing with projects that promise unparalleled luxury. The pursuit of perfection, as this case alleges, can sometimes hide really significant imperfections. Imperfections that ultimately impact everyone involved, from the developers and the original board members to, most significantly, the unit owners who invested not just their immense capital, but also their trust. This case truly underscores the vital importance of ensuring that the reality of the construction actually meets the promise of the marketing, especially when the stakes, both financial and personal, are just this incredibly high.